They watching.
Today, we're diving into one of history's most tangled questions. So how does a single gunshot in some provincial city ignite a global war? I mean, it sounds almost impossible, right? Well, to really get it, we can't just look at that one moment, that one spark. No, we've got to go back. We need to look at the world that was built in the decades leading up to 1914. A world absolutely simmering with ambition, rivalry. So our story really kicks off in the late 1800s. And this was an era of just aggressive global expansion. But you got to understand, this wasn't the kind of colonialism you might have learned about from earlier centuries. No, this was something else entirely, something new, something way more intense. We call it modern imperialism. Just listen to this. This quote from the British imperialist Cecil Rhodes. I mean, it perfectly captures the mindset of the time. And you have to realize this wasn't some fringe opinion from a crackpot. This was a powerful, mainstream belief. It was the justification for conquering millions of people. So, what exactly made this modern imperialism so, well, modern and different? Think about it like this. Old school colonialism was often content to just set up shop on the coast, for trade. This new wave, it was totally different. It pushed deep inland, into the heart of Africa and Asia. The goal wasn't just about making a profit anymore. It was about total, absolute control. So, what was the fuel for this engine? What drove this massive global land grab? Well, it was like a really potent, really dangerous cocktail of motives. You had the practical, nuts and bolts needs of industry mixed in with these powerful, intoxicating ideas about national glory and cultural dominance. Let's break it down. You've basically got three main drivers here. First, the economy. The Industrial Revolution was roaring, and it was hungry. It needed raw materials, rubber, copper, you name it. Politically, an empire was the ultimate status symbol. It was like the designer handbag of nations. A brand new Germany, for example, was desperate to get colonies to prove it was a big player. And then there's the cultural piece. This idea of a civilizing mission, this belief that they were helping by spreading their religion and way of life. A pretty paternalistic view, to say the least. This competition just got hotter and hotter, especially in Africa. It actually got a name, the Scramble for Africa. And it reached this fever pitch where, in 1884, the major European powers all sat down together in Berlin and literally drew lines on a map. They carved up an entire continent for themselves. And the most shocking part? Not a single African leader was invited. Not one. And if you want to see the ugliest, most brutal side of this era, look no further than the Congo. Now, here's the really twisted part you need to understand. The Congo wasn't a colony of Belgium, not in the beginning. It was the personal, private property of one man, King Leopold II. And he sold it to the world as this great humanitarian mission. But the reality, well, it was a living nightmare. This quote you see here is from the Casement Report. It was a bombshell investigation that blew the lid off Leopold's so-called humanitarian project. It revealed a brutal slave state, all built to extract rubber and ivory through forced labor. The sheer terror of that regime, famously symbolized by the practice of cutting off hands for not meeting quotas, it caused the deaths of millions of people. Okay, so all this rivalry happening across the globe, it didn't just stay out there. It was like it boomeranged right back to Europe and poured gasoline on a fire that was already smoldering. Suddenly, the atmosphere on the continent was thick with paranoia, with hyper-nationalism, and this deep-seated desire for revenge. Europe was turning into a powder keg, just waiting for a match. So what really threw a wrench in the works? The creation of Germany. Out of nowhere, it felt like. In just a few short years, this guy, the Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, who's both brilliant and totally ruthless, he just completely shattered the old European balance of power with a series of quick, decisive wars. And boom, by 1871, there was a new powerhouse, a military and industrial giant. Germany's big debut on the world stage became at France's expense. And it was a deep, deep humiliation. France didn't just lose the war, they lost money, and they lost the territory of Alsace-Lorraine. And that loss, it created this simmering, burning desire for payback. It's a concept called revanchism, from the French word for revenge, and it would dominate French thinking for the next 4 decades. So now you've got this new, super powerful Germany, and right next door, a bitter, vengeful France. Europe basically becomes a playground of fear and suspicion. And what happens when everyone's scared? They pick teams. The great powers started forming these massive interlocking military alliances. It was literally like they were choosing up sides for a world war that hadn't even broken out yet. And this system they created, it was a perfect trap, a tripwire. On one side, you had the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And staring them down from the other side was the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and Great Britain. With Europe carved up into these 2 armed camps, a small fight between any 2 of them could now set off a chain reaction, a domino effect that would drag everybody else in. So, the stage is set. The powder keg is full to the brim. The whole system is just waiting for one tiny spark. And that spark comes on June 28, 1914. A Serbian nationalist shoots and kills the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne in Sarajevo. And just watch how fast the dominoes fall. Austria-Hungary, knowing they have Germany's backing, a blank check they called it, issues this insane, impossible ultimatum to Serbia. Serbia tries, but they can't agree to everything, so Austria declares war. Then Russia, who sees itself as Serbia's big brother, starts mobilizing its huge army. Germany sees that as a direct threat, so it declares war on Russia, and then on Russia's ally, France. It was like clockwork. The trap sprung exactly as it was designed to. And remember those global empires we talked about? This is where they come back in a huge way. This wasn't just a European war. It became a world war. We all have that image of the trenches on the Western Front, right? But the fighting exploded everywhere. It was in the Balkans, all across those African colonies, in the Middle East, even on Asian fronts. And this was war like no one had ever seen. It was the first truly industrial war. You know, all those romantic ideas about glorious cavalry charges? Gone. Replaced by the muddy, disease-ridden hell of trench warfare. New weapons, the machine gun, heavy artillery, poison gas, they made it possible to kill people on a scale that was just unimaginable. The psychological damage was devastating. They called it shell shock then. Today, we know it as PTSD. It was total war, meaning entire societies were mobilized. Everyone, from factory workers to farmers, was part of the war machine. The cost? It's just staggering. By the time the guns finally went silent on November 11th, 1918, over 15 million people, soldiers and civilians, were dead. Think about that. An entire generation just decimated. So the war ends, but the story doesn't. In fact, the end of the fighting just opened up a whole new set of really difficult questions. Profound questions about responsibility, about justice, about the legacy of both the empire and the war itself. And honestly, these are questions we're still wrestling with. Let's be clear, that imperial system wasn't just some background noise for the war. It was a root cause, and it left behind this long, painful legacy of exploitation, of borders drawn on a map in Europe that still cause conflict today. So this leads to a really big, really tough question. Is the West responsible for its colonial past? And philosophers give us a few different lenses to look at this through. Someone like Foucault would say that colonial power was sneaky. It dressed itself up as progress and science to create these systems of control. Then there's Paul Ricoeur, who makes a really interesting point. He says guilt is personal. You can't inherit it, but responsibility can be collective. A whole society can be responsible for acknowledging its past to fix the present. And then you have a more modern thinker like Martha Nussbaum, who talks about restorative justice. It's not just about apologizing. It's about actively working to give back the opportunities, the capabilities for people to live full lives that colonialism took away. And, you know, after seeing the sheer mind-numbing destruction of the Great War, you have to ask another fundamental and, frankly, very uncomfortable question. Can war ever be justified as a way to get to peace? And this is a debate that has raged for centuries. On one side, you have the just war argument. This idea goes way back to thinkers like Thomas Aquinas. It says, yes, war can be justified, but only as an absolute last resort to stop an even greater evil. But on the other side, you have pacifists like Mahatma Gandhi. Their argument is simple. The means become the ends. Violence can't lead to peace. It only ever breeds more violence, planting the seeds for the next war. So that brings us to our final thought for today. We've seen how these powerful forces, empire, nationalism, rivalry, built a world that was primed to explode. The past itself is gone, sure, but its echoes, its consequences, are everywhere. So knowing all of this, how do we build a better, more just future on a foundation that's riddled with conquest and conflict? What's our role? What's your role in all of this?
Signal detected. Firewall breach. Begin transmission. They watching. They watching.